All right, thanks, Joe. And next time, check your text messages, because if I'm texting you about getting on the mic, maybe... No, I'm kidding, I'm not going to tease about that.
From ScienceSortOf.com, you're listening to Science Sort of.
Hello and welcome to Science Sort of. It is I, your host, Ryan Haupt, and this is episode 290, and our theme this week is Because Science Live. Now, what does that mean? What that means is it's been a week, my friends. It has been kind of a rough one, and in part because of some external circumstances, we had a show planned that we were not able to record on time. Which, of course, is a little bit frustrating, but that is the way it goes. And believe it or not, we actually have a lot of really cool shows planned for the next couple of weeks/months. So stay tuned, because we're going to start dropping some really great stuff on y'all here in the not-too-distant future. But first, if you check your feed regularly, you may have noticed that we put up a short episode that was an extended preview for American Innovations, a podcast from the folks over at Wondery. And I got Abe to hop on the mic with me just so I'd have someone else to introduce that little preview. But unbeknownst to me, our own Joe Bat-Winnis is already a fan of that podcast. And so he recorded a little snippet to kind of encourage folks to go check out that preview and the podcast if they haven't already done so. So take it away, Joe.
Hey, PaleoPOWs, Joe here. You may have heard a preview on this channel for a new season of a podcast from Wondery called American Innovations. What you didn't hear during that preview was my voice. That's because Ryan didn't even give me 30 minutes to respond to his message about recording it before he ran off and asked Abe to record instead. In the immortal words of Michelle Tanner, how rude. I had a very broken Miata that needed mending at the time. What Ryan didn't know was that I've listened to every episode of American Innovations. It's a great podcast. Popular science author Stephen Johnson retells in narrative form the development of some of the most important discoveries and innovations in history, including genetics, nuclear power, and in the upcoming season, artificial intelligence. There's also a series of interviews about the future, which is worth a listen. So if you're in need of even more science and engineering in your podcast library, check out American Innovations. It's available wherever you get your podcast from, and it will still be available to you when you crawl out from under your broken car and reach for your phone. Unlike some things, Ryan.
All right, thanks for that, Joe. And now on to the meat of this week's episode. So if you can't tell, I've been doing a little file management and restructuring because I keep finding old bits of audio that we never actually released. And this week, we are listening to the panel that occurred after our live show at the Bay Area Science Festival back in 2014. We did a live show, and it was a lot of fun, and we had some really great guests on. That is episode 214 of this podcast, if you want to go back and listen to that. And then after we finished up recording, you'll hear at the end of, or towards the end of our episode, I give a shout out into the audience and say, hey, Kyle, is it okay if we take a few more questions? And he says something like, yeah, good to go. And that is because that was Kyle Hill, the host of the Nerdist Because Science, and he was hosting a panel, a live Because Science panel after our show. And we already had Tim there. We already had all the audio equipment set up, so we went ahead and recorded it. But we never actually released it because it wasn't intended to be a podcast. But I went ahead and edited the audio. I think it's a fun show, and I think you guys are going to enjoy listening to it. So the structure of this show is it's all about explaining pop culture using actual science, which is something I know I'm a big fan of, and I assume you all are too if you listen to this podcast. So the panel is hosted by Kyle Hill, so he's the main voice you're going to be hearing. We start a little bit into the actual show, so you won't hear us introduce ourselves, but Kyle is the main one. And then the voices you will recognize are myself and frequent guest of the show, Zach Weiner, so you should know him. And the voice you may not know is Patrick House, who is a neuroscientist and writer, and he has done some podcast stuff, a little show called Radiolab. Maybe you've heard of it. It was really cool to get his perspective on some of the things we talk about. So we sort of did it Q&A style, but because the people asking questions from the audience didn't have microphones, we weren't really able to pick that up. And when I went back and did some noise reduction, a lot of that gets dropped out. So I will jump in from time to time to actually kind of restate what I think I remember the question as being. But without further ado, we're going to go ahead and drop you into the discussion where we start off talking about Jurassic Park and feathered dinosaurs, which is something that just won't go away. Apparently, we're going to be stuck debating this until they actually just put feathers on those freaking dinosaurs. So, here we go. Man, I'm conflicted about the feathers.
Why? Because they had feathers? Or because they had feathers?
I'm conflicted because I understand the needs for there to be a consistent continuity in the series. So you establish velociraptors as these scaly monsters.
Deinonychus?
Yes, Deinonychus was the model they were using because they needed a puppet big enough for a man to stand inside. And they were scarier to be bigger. But I understand that why a producer who doesn't have a science background would argue that let's keep it consistent with the look from before.
Sure.
I also think one throwaway line of dialogue in that, hey, I thought that in the first iteration of Jurassic Park, the velociraptors didn't have feathers, and then you just say, oh, yeah, we've gotten really good at extracting DNA, we don't need frogs anymore. So
that'd be good enough.
I think there's a throwaway line you could include that to make the feathers happen, but I understand why they're not happening. So I'm trying not to get too upset, because we haven't actually, we don't know. If it's a terrible movie, I don't care if they don't have feathers anyway. But if it's a great movie, then I'll be upset they don't have feathers.
If Jeff Goldblum's in it, I'm in.
Yeah, well.
Yeah.
All right, so I think in agreement, I sort of, at least growing up, didn't really think that much about the science in the science fiction novels that I was reading. And to me, I think more the inspiration of science fiction was, just the sort of realm of possibility that was so much further beyond, exactly where we are now, like reading all of Asimov's robot novels or things like that, which I think were particularly nice because he at least tried to move away from the all robots are walking around shooting people thing with his 3 laws of robotics, where robots weren't actually allowed to hurt humans.
And somehow they did every single book.
Yeah, it still ended up happening because that's a good storyline.
It is a trope. It is a trope that does kind of annoy me though. When every robot that comes out, if you see like DARPA's Big Dog or any of the Asimov.
Mm-hmm. The Honda one?
The Honda one's coming out. It's the headline in every single piece is always, look how terrifying this thing is. I appreciate the breadth of science fiction because it has room for, well, what if you fell in love with a robot? Or what if they didn't hurt anybody ever? Yeah, I think that that expands on the human experience. And sometimes it feels cheap to me to just make everything a Terminator.
Well, it's also KitchenAid comes out with a new blender, and if somebody gets their hand stuck in it, we don't talk about blenders. Mm-hmm. What about the new blender? Does the new blender have the 3 laws installed on it? Otherwise,
maybe it should though.
I know, right? Is a blender a robot? It's a much larger philosophical question that we don't have time for right now. But
right.
I don't want to hijack this. But I'm kind of going to. I just want to say that here's a funny thing that's happened here in this fabulous environment. So
is this a horror story? Do we want to know this?
No. This is a great story. So the communicator that Star Treks have. Ship to captain. Okay, yeah, exactly. Thank you. That was beautiful.
I've done a lot of it.
So turns out that around the corner there was this group that were developing a personal communicator like that. You just tap it and you can talk. And it was developed originally for things like Gap. Hello, do we have a medium-sized black in this T-shirt? That kind of thing. But they've
just like on the Enterprise.
They've developed this, and they've done it out of this space because they found that all of this mechanical stuff was so retro 70s Star Trek inspired stuff.
Cool.
So I have been their muse, apparently. I don't know. They're coming to photograph me next week to open the box with the communicator in. I'm going to be the first person to wear one. And I don't know who can communicate with if I'm the only person who has one. The technology's fabulous. Yeah. Who are you going to talk to?
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be great?
Yeah, I never knew how the communicator knew when I was done speaking. It's like, I'll be right up to the bridge. Yeah, I really got to take a dump. Like, how does it just... Anyway, a little bit back on track. So...
Can I?
Yeah, no.
I don't know the name of it, but bandsaws. The something. There's a tool in a machine shop. I'm sure someone knows the answer to this, but that they sense if your hand is close and it automatically shuts down.
With the conductance of.
I mean, in some ways, that's the conductance of skin. It'll automatically turn off. I mean, that's rule 1, right? I mean, it's getting there. They're like programming in. They're starting to program in.
It does destroy the machine, however.
Right, but I mean, that's the point. Don't harm the human.
At the sake of my own well-being, I will kill myself for you, master.
So I think popular culture can be a very good tool to communicate science to me. I think everyone has had some experience where they got at least interested in some topic. For me, the thing I usually mention right now is a video game called The Last of Us, which dealt with a zombie apocalypse, but chose a real-world parasite called Cordyceps that is a fungus that zombifies ants. So if you've never heard of this thing before, they're spores that burrow into an ant's body, and then it extends little tendrily fingers out and starts sucking out nutrients from the ant, and then we think it releases some kind of chemical that we haven't pinned down into its brain that makes it move away from the colony, up a stem of a tree or a leaf or a branch, then death grip on the back of it, and then kind of like my hair here, it sprouts out the back of its head and rains down more spores on the ants below, which is gross and creepy, but The Last of Us used that as say, well, what if it made a few evolutionary jumps into humans? Like, I appreciate that. That makes sense. It got me interested in this kind of thing. I think it's easier than just saying magic happened, like Day of the Dead or something like that. And we have someone on the panel who studies another potential zombifier now that I think about it. Can you tell us a little bit about why it's so zombies are unnerving in themselves, and why we should be a little bit weirded out by what Toxo does?
Yeah. So I think The Last of Us, first of all, they had to go a different route because, I don't know if you know this, but the original Resident Evil for PlayStation, I don't even when, 90s or something, buried deep in, you can actually, as you go around and you're being scared, you can go in and read journals and logs. And so Resident Evil is actually based on Toxoplasma.
Really? Oh,
so cool. The premise of that was that Toxos jumps into humans and then causes the whole pandemic.
Spillover, right?
So I think The Last of Us, they had to stay. It's well trodden territory.
Toxo already has.
Yeah, it already has.
Lots of people already have
Toxoplasma
gondii in their brain.
Yeah.
Oh, and so when we say jump, like this is what happened with Ebola, called a spillover. When something is in a reservoir long enough, we think it's bats. It can make an evolutionary jump to also infect a different species. And that's a spillover, and that's what we're talking about with jumping. But with Toxo specifically, we're seeing some correlation in the data that suggests that it's not just making mice less fearful of cat urine. What else is it doing to us? Maybe.
Well, so first I want to say something about why I think zombies are scary.
No.
So first is like, why is this a problem? And it because like we behave in a lot of different ways, and we have a lot of different, like there are a lot of forks in our lives that cause us, our personalities to turn out the way they do. And like, what does it really matter? Is it really that bothersome if there's one thing that you have that maybe is subtly altering your behavior? Because like we all know that like if people get anxious or angry if they're hungry, right? That's just something that's like this basic thing. It's really just tied to our entire personality changes in something very, very basic, like just being a little bit hungry. And so we know that our behaviors are quite variable even on a day-to-day basis. So why is this so bothersome, and why is it's a trope in so many horror movies, just this idea that someone looks exactly the same, their eyes don't change color, their hair doesn't change color, they don't get taller or shorter, nothing changes except something about them like flips inside. So like this is the premise of The Thing, it's the premise of all these zombie movies, these horror movies. It's even in James Cameron's The Abyss, there's this thing where, so it's the Navy SEAL team that goes down like many thousands, whatever, feet below. And then one of them just gets the bends. I think like the explanation in the film is just one of the Navy SEAL captains just gets like nitrogen poisoning and he starts going mad. But it doesn't really matter like what makes you go mad. Like there's a lot of different versions of this already out there.
Sure.
Like science fiction has played this out.
Yeah.
For decades. But then it is kind of funny that you do end up with, okay, well, a lot of people do actually have this parasite. So about a third of the world has the parasite. And the only real good evidence, I think, is there's a link to schizophrenia in about 60 studies now have replicated and found this link. And so that's still not even close to anything we would say, like this causes that. But it's like on the order of a really good theory at this point. So it's basically just that if you take a group of people that have schizophrenia and a group of people that don't, the rates are much higher of having this parasite.
Sure. And that's what makes it scary. It's that loss of autonomy, that loss of the sense of control that I think that's what makes zombies scary in the first place. What if I was still here physically, but I lost myself? In the same way, you don't want to think that a parasite is making you do something that you don't want to do, and you wouldn't even know about it. That's creepy. That's kind of like you said, this uncanny feeling that something is quite off. And you see that with faces when we try to replicate faces. Like, it's close, but I can't. There's something about it that makes it really.
Yeah, and I think there's this really powerful stigma when we think about mental illnesses versus other types of illnesses. So, for example, like when you talk about someone who has a cold, you say they have a cold. But if you talk about someone who has schizophrenia, they are schizophrenic.
Sure.
Like it's a thing that they are. It's not a temporary thing that just goes away. And I think that stigma has to do with this fear of ours, that it's like they look the same. They look the same as they used to, but now they've had this schizophrenic break or something's different, and we don't know what that is. And so there's a really neat. I mean, I'll be quick, but my whole interest in this is kind of trying to kind of eliminate some of the stigma. So when people used to have ulcers, people always got ulcers. And there used to be this thing where they had an ulceric personality, where people thought that it was like weakness of who they are. They're like some negative aspect of their constitution that made them get ulcers.
Yeah, you look like a kind of guy to get ulcers.
Yeah, exactly. But we don't have ulceric anymore.
Yeah.
And so why? Like, why did that adjective just like disappear? Because we figured out that it was bacteria that did it, and then it no longer had the stigma. And so if there's any link between some of these mental illnesses and something just as silly as a parasite, then maybe it can change or alter some of that stigma a bit.
I totally agree. And, that's the good science, right? But the bad science, I think, is what gets us either talking to our friends about popular culture or at least wanting to talk to other people about that. Like, yeah, this movie was great, but you believe when, George Clooney was like swinging around in gravity? I'm like, there's no momentum. Like you cut the cord and it would just float away. That's fun to talk about. Zach, give me some bad science that annoys you.
Can I give some bad science that might relate to the zombie thing?
Yeah.
So maybe you can address this. So one thing that bugs me, there's this scenario that's in a lot of science fiction of like the global pandemic that kills everybody. But in real life, diseases tend to attenuate over time because it doesn't benefit a disease to kill you, right? The disease doesn't necessarily want to kill you, it just exists. So you would expect in a real zombie scenario, the disease might attenuate. Maybe you get a milder and milder zombie until zombies just kind of walked among us and they were kind of like us, but had this condition. And would that be more realistic? But no one's done this in a movie because it'd be boring.
You're a carrier for
like zombieism should attenuate.
Yeah, everyone's going to get this virus. Oh, wait, not really. Never mind.
There's actually
they'll have it. They'll just carry it.
There's actually a book that came out recently. There's a novel that came out recently called The Girl with All the Gifts, which is basically about a little bit of a spoiler to say it's a zombie book. It's a zombie book. But basically the point of the zombie book is this, that some small percentage of people can just, sort of live with the zombie virus.
Yeah.
And as long as they don't encounter any other humans, if they do that, then, immediately they want to kill them. But otherwise they can just live in their society just like normal.
There's a lot of Canadians that would be fine. It's easy to rip on Canada. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I mean, with Toxo in particular, humans are dead-end hosts for the parasite. We are not. It can only sexually reproduce in a cat, so it has to get from one cat to another cat, and we're not predated by cats.
But I bite every cat I see, just in case.
Yeah.
So I want to help. Maybe it's altered my brain. I don't know.
Yeah, that'd be. I bite small animals in my free time.
Could I actually put forth the thing that bugged me in a movie?
Yeah, keep going, man.
You ever see the movie 2012?
It's okay. It was just you and that guy.
Yeah, that might be true.
And John keeps
it just had my favorite bad
what was it?
Science. So there's this part where they're the science is like, it's so bad I couldn't even make it up. They had this line, I think they said, the neutrinos have mutated. And what I love about that, like, if you know anything about physics, it's crazy.
We laugh too hard. You know that's ridiculous, right?
So, because like a neutrino, it's not like a cat. Like every neutrino is the same. It's so I did a comic that was vaguely about this, where there's a guy who walks into a room and he pulls down the shades and he says, and this woman asks him why he's scared, and he says, 2 has mutated into 3, because that's how stupid it is to say the neutrinos have mutated. It's a fundamental aspect of reality. Like, there are neutrinos across the universe that are the same as they are here.
They're passing through you right now.
Right. Feels great.
I kind of disagree.
You disagree?
Disagree.
With the fact that that's a thing?
No, I disagree with the fact that it's a dumb premise.
Neutrinos mutating?
Yeah. Well, I have a biology degree, so everything mutates. But no, I think just me, but for something like 2012, so we have these neutrino detectors deep in, we put them in like abandoned mines and things like that because we want them deep in the earth, because you have to force a neutrino to pass through a lot of matter before you have any chance of it interacting. They're very non-interactive with normal matter. And so to say that they mutated, while dumb, is only one. You're only asking me to you're only asking me for one gimme. Like, your one thing has to change.
Wait. If neutrinos mutated, every atom in the universe would explode.
This is why we. We have these panels.
But 2012 was a disaster movie, so yes, neutrinos shift their behavior, and the world does explode, in essence. And so there are so many other science fiction movies out there where we're asked to believe so much more nonsense, as opposed to just one ridiculous premise.
But there's also a scale of nonsense. There's like...
Yeah, it's a really tiny particle.
There's like, oh yeah, well maybe a fungus sort of mutated to be able to affect humans.
What you're saying is like, oh, these electrons became protons.
Yeah. Maybe those scientists were just bad at their jobs, and it was a different particle that we'd never encountered. But like, something.
No, dude.
Something like
gravity just reversed polarity.
Something like Independence Day is asking me to disbelieve a lot more of what I know about science than something like 2012, because Independence Day is asking me to expect that there.
Yeah, but it's not like saying like this water is fire now.
That's science. That's a different alien invasion.
Oh yeah.
If there were a movie where 2 mutated into 3, like if you had like 2 fingers, there'd be 3. Like, you would say, well, it's only one thing I have to believe.
Yeah, I would.
You can't win. You can't win.
Because you couldn't even say that because another finger would pop up.
Yeah. Also, in the spirit of mentioning stuff that we're excited about and that gets us excited, Interstellar, yeah?
Oh yeah.
Right? Wormholes and let's go see that. Anyway, so because the last science sort of took some questions, I want to do the same thing with the rest of our time. Anybody, or else we'll just keep talking, anybody that has a question about their favorite example of good or bad science or what is going on, we will try to help discuss it and or answer it. Anybody, and you can just yell it out and we'll repeat the question. Yeah, dude.
So Ryan jumping in here to kind of restate the question that can't really be heard in the audio. This guy was asking a question about mind transference into other bodies, robot or biological, or organic, I guess would be the word. And he veered a little bit into some inappropriateness, and it was late and we'd all had a few beers by that point. But I will drop us right back in where Kyle kind of cuts him off because we all know where the question is going, but we don't really want to let this guy get to his final point, whatever it may have been. And we kind of have a free will and discussion from there.
All right. You could have cut that off in the middle of that question. No. I'm curious. No, I'm curious too. I'm curious too. For everything we know about the mind being what the brain does, how possible would it be to just keep it alive and put it in an? I mean, I know it's kind of crazy, but what are the limitations on something like that actually happening if you had all the resources in the world?
So at this point, I feel like this is something that bothers me because it's so easy to think of, like, oh yeah, I'm just me, except I'm in a computer now, or in somebody else's body now. But in terms of our ability to actually do this, I have almost no idea how we would go about it. You know,
Why
in
is
terms
that?
of the number of neurons that we can record from in the brain at any given time. We're talking, 100 is a lot. And and there are a lot more than 100 neurons in the brain.
80 billion.
Billions, certainly. And I don't know that you would necessarily need to replicate the exact state of every single neuron, but I think that you would need to be able to have a very fine-grained measurement of A, the current state of all of your neurons, B, all of their connections,
Right.
and C, a good enough sort of model either, in your computer or whatever that could actually then simulate it forward in time in a way that is realistic. So not just replicating the current state, but also figuring out what's the next thing that happens.
Sure, that's the transporter problem as well.
Yeah.
Would you be the same person if I recorded the position and velocity of every single atom in your body and then ripped them apart? You die, and then I put you together in the exact same way. Are you the same person? Does your mind change at all if you just freeze everything and then put it right back together? It's that's the hard problem of Star Trek that no one deals with. Like, am I a different man? Kind of.
And that,
right? She had one.
and so that's that's a translation problem. If you're going from brain to computer, something like that. People see Lucy. Did you guys see that movie? No.
You only use 10%, right?
Can I just? Oh.
It's 10%, yeah.
It's about 10. Yeah.
10?
Yeah, exactly.
So if I put a pencil into your brain 10 times, 9 times, fine, on average.
We only need to copy 8 billion.
Yeah, no, that's fine. It's just, you just need to get the right 10% of it, and you're good. I can talk about Lucy. I actually tried for this Bay Area Science Festival to get a whole hour where I would just talk about Lucy, but they wouldn't let me do it. Because I actually think it's, but the problem is that I'm actually going to be a contrarian and actually say all the ways in which it was plausible, as opposed to implausible. But we can do that if we want.
Send it to Hudson at Slate. Yeah.
So the question of, I think in the book there's okay, can you keep a brain alive? Can you actually take the physical brain without having to actually translate it and put it into another body? And to me, the completely bizarre thing is that, so I had an undergraduate degree in philosophy, and we talk about brains in vats all the time. It's like this thought experiment that's a huge thing. And then a year into doing neuroscience research, I had a mouse brain in a vat that I was keeping alive so as to record neurons from it. We can do it. We understand on a basic energetic level that the brain just needs support. And the funny thing is, I was trying to imagine, you know how physicists have that, the big Hadron Collider thing? You guys have a big project.
Yeah, it's big, dude.
Right. So, but I mean, you have this multi-billion, international 25-year project that was going to a single experiment. I was trying to think of and envision what the equivalent of that would be for neuroscience. And just as something to ask, if we had the money and the time, what would we do? And I think we might do something like that. But every neuroscientist I've told that to has just been that's the most boring problem imaginable, because it ultimately ends up just being a plumbing problem. It's like arteries. All it really is a problem of being able to give it adequate blood flow. And so it's a really amazing. It's a really beautiful concept, but it ends up, I think, being a really dumb answer of just you just have to sew together a bunch of arteries.
And on that, and anyone else have a question? You can just shout it at my face, or I'll keep talking about something else. Can the Hulk happen? My favorite explanation for why so the idea is, right, that he gets hit by a large gamma ray burst, yeah? If you were to survive something like that, what would be happening? Well, his genetic structure is changing so that different proteins are expressed, increasing his size, that kind of thing. If his DNA was shattered in every cell in his body and then somehow pulled itself back together and you had completely different gene expression, could you get someone who had more muscle or had increased aggressiveness? Yeah, that's plausible, but my favorite... kind of no. But my favorite thing about the Hulk is, why is he green? And the simplest explanation that I heard is, what happens to your body when it rapidly increases in mass? It would be like tearing every single muscle fiber you had in your body, right? And what happens when you get a really, really bad bruise and your body starts to process the damage? Yellow into green-ish. So my favorite bit of real science about the Hulk is if your entire body just kind of shot out and increased in size and tissue was ripping. Eventually, if you survive that thing, you might kind of look green all over. And we have the technology for pants like that.
Actually,
Lululemon has the technology for pants.
I did a thing about the Hulk physiology for Marvel.
Were you with the
This was part of their
Avengers initiative?
No, this was part of Marvel's. They have this AR app that's like an app you have on your phone.
Yeah.
And you can get stuff, extra content in the comics, like DVD commentary for the comics.
Sure.
And so I did a couple of videos for them about various science things that were happening in the comics. So like there's an issue where somebody sets off all the volcanoes on Earth at once. So I give a geological perspective of like, is this possible? How would you do this? And I did another thing about the Hulk, like what happens when the Hulk transforms. And I did not consider the putrefaction aspect that you just mentioned, but one of the things I did mention is that a lot of the things we see with the Hulk's transformation and who he is when he is the Hulk is an overactive fight-or-flight response, right? So he's displaying a lot of the characteristics that we would expect to see if somebody was in the fight mode and not the flight mode. So his pupils dilate. A lot of the times when we see the Hulk transform, you get a close-up of the eye and it shows the pupil dilating. His muscles certainly getting extra oxygen for extra power. He's very angry, he's very mad. And one of the things that I learned when I was doing the research for this is that when you have an extreme fight or flight response where your adrenal glands really fire and you've got a lot of epinephrine flowing through your system, is your tear glands shut down. So the Hulk can't cry, which I think is one of the saddest things I've ever heard. Because all Hulk wants is to be left alone by puny humans.
Hulk, don't cry. We have another question?
So after discussing the Hulk for a few minutes, someone in the audience pointed out that there would be a lot of increase in entropy every time Bruce Banner became the Hulk, an increase in the disorder of the universe, and Zach really appreciated that comment. So that is why he says such a satisfied and smug thank you.
Thank you. Entropy has to increase somewhere, right? You can't get mass for free.
He yells a lot, though?
Yeah, that's just additional entropy, though. Yeah.
There's a lot of empty space inside your atoms. Maybe they just...
That's why, but then...
Relatively speaking.
That means he's weak, though. So, like, his atoms are half as dense as ours now. So that means you could, like, poke through him when he's the Hulk, right?
Becomes gaseous.
Right.
But that's the thing about talking about science in your science fiction, right? Is like it's a lot more fun to play in a universe rather than break it, because we can break these universes. That can't happen because entropy. That's a fundamental law of the universe. Yeah, that's no fun though. It's not.
Gaseous phase sounds awesome.
Gaseous
I would read
phase
that.
Hulk?
Gaseous phase Hulk.
I like the idea of Hulk as a balloon, where the reason all of his tissue stretches is because all the insides convert to gas.
Yeah. So it's like an aggression display. He's not really that tough.
Yeah. No, he's just a puffed up peacock. That's all he is.
He's like a pufferfish.
Is it obvious that Zach and I know each other and have done this before?
Does anyone have a non-Hulk related question?
Why would they? Hulk is strongest there is.
Throw it at me, bro.
Bringing in here just to keep somewhat of the typical format for the show, and it would not be an episode of Science Sort of if we, in this case I, did not also talk about what I was drinking. All I remember having a pretty good beer when we recorded the live episode, and I think there was still some more beer in the kind of behind-the-scenes fridge that we were using. So I probably was drinking a beer while this was recorded, but I do not remember what. So what I'm having here instead today is nothing too exciting because it's a little bit earlier in the day and I am alone, but I was doing some mise en place for dinner tonight, making a little salad with some mushrooms, some sauteed mushrooms, and I deglazed the pan after cooking the mushrooms, and I deglazed it with a little bit of sherry. And it was one of those rare instances where I feel like I have 2 or 3 bottles of sherry that I bought just for cooking and never used for drinking. And so it's one of those ingredients that's like really hard to get through a whole thing of. And when you do, it's something of an accomplishment. So I am at the end of a little bit of Amontillado sherry, which is the one from the Edgar Allan Poe story. And I have no real strong opinions on sherry. Most of the recipes I have just call for something dry, and I just go and buy whatever is the cheapest looking stuff that still looks like it's a decent product. So let's give this a little try. Yeah, I mean, it tastes kind of like very oaky, kind of slightly sour, slightly sweet wine. I don't know. Do people know about sherry? Listeners out there who like enjoy sherry, who are that fancy, write in. Tell me what sherry I should try on the show that will be more enjoyable than this. I love the smell when I put it in a hot pan. It doesn't smell bad now. The flavor is actually very mild, and it's just not that exciting. So I think I will continue to use this for cooking. But if somebody wants to suggest something to buy to actually drink, you can do that. You can suggest that on any of our social media or on the contact form at the website. So with that, back to Because Science. Woman eventually gets a microphone, so I'm going to kind of transition back into her explaining what she wanted to talk about, but essentially she was asking about a book called Blindsight, and that leads into a discussion about science fiction being really, really accurate as opposed to just throwing it at the wall, so hard sci-fi versus soft sci-fi, and we kind of give some cool examples there and talk about how people making science fiction can actually get help by using resources like the Science and Entertainment Exchange, and of course all of the media and stuff we talk about, books, movies, things like that, I will include links to in the show notes as well as a general running list of all the things we talk about, a little bit non-traditional for our show notes, but I'll try to get it all in there.
So has anybody read Blindsight? Peter Watts? All right. This is the sort of book that like a real hardcore neuroscience geek will like aggressively geek out on. So basically there's a lot of neuroscience stuff in it. I won't get too much into it, but in any case, there's one species of aliens that you can't see move because they only move while your eyes are making saccades, which are these point-to-point eye movements that we make. And there's actually a process in our brain that makes us not be able to see while we're actively moving our eyes from point to point, because otherwise it would look like everything was rushing around a lot.
Pickpockets know this very well, and that
really,
and especially pickpockets and magicians, especially when magicians work with neuroscientists, they say, "I know not to lead your eye in an arcing motion because your eye tracks that, but if you were to make a saccade like that, you have to go from point to point, and if I lead you from here to there, I can be doing something else in that time that you are not processing anything." I'm sorry, go ahead.
Right. So in any case, that was one example of just like a very small detail, but that
you appreciate that.
I really loved it because this is obviously well researched into something that seems plausible.
You guys have anything very accurate yet still fun to read? Because I think people think that science is just too dry all the time. But that's not true. And to your question about, does accuracy matter in a science fiction book? I probably not. I mean, as long as it's servicing a story and a narrative, that's what you remember. You can make it accurate, but unless you need that to happen for some part of the narrative story, it's always going to fall to the narrative. That's what happens in Hollywood a lot. In LA has the Science and Entertainment Exchange, and they loan out scientists to things like Thor and Interstellar and Big Hero 6 and stuff like that. And they say, this can't happen. Why don't you say this happens instead? Or X, Y, and Z is what really would happen to Tony Stark when he went from this way and then straight up. He would turn into jelly inside of his suit. But they will say that the directors come back to them like, okay, that's cool. And they will just they'll not take their advice because it's in service of the story. As long as it is telling a story that people are going to relate to and emote with, I think I would be able to sacrifice some accuracy for that, because the emotional impact is really what gets people to learn, I think, sometimes when it's really burned into your brain. But when it's straight up nonsense, like something like Lucy, the movie...
Not nonsense.
The story and the movie is actually quite artsy and weird, but since it explicitly says, like in all the stuff, like did you know that you only use 10% of your brain?
But the funny thing is, if Morgan says it actually happens. Like it's true. Yeah. His narration
at
creates
95%.
Reality. He's God. Movie where they reveal that.
I have no idea.
Could I give a book recommendation?
Yeah.
In that vein, Solaris by Stanislav Lem, I think is sadly accurate. There's an important linchpin of the story is that they meet with this entity and they just fail to communicate with it. I thought that was very clever because you have this idea in almost all science fiction, when you meet another species, they're more or less like you. They exist for about the same amount of time, or if they don't, they kind of behave like they do.
Same number of limbs.
So there's all sorts of stuff that's similar, but beyond that, like the even if it's not a Star Trek alien with like a thing on its head or whatever, like it'll still not even be close to what it would probably actually be like to meet a species that didn't evolve anything like under the conditions humans did.
Sure.
So maybe not accurate in the sense it was being used, but in a sort of philosophical sense, accurate. And there's a really boring book by Stanislav Lem called Fiasco, which is sort of like Solaris on steroids. So if you like Stanislav Lem, and you can deal with that like sort of sad Eastern European philosophy in your science fiction, Fiasco is a great book.
I'm pretty pigeonholed into just mind control parasite movies. So I have...
Are there any really... Are there better ones than others? What would be a better one?
Upstream Color by the guy who made Primer. I'm forgetting his name. Upstream Color. It's incredible. It's about a 3-part parasite-host relationship. Nobody has seen it. That's awesome. So sad. So there's a South Korean film called Deranged, and I don't think it's come out anywhere in the U.S., but what I really like about it is that it is about a parasite that's very similar to rabies. And I think it has a certain plausibility because rabies, as some people may know, is heavily engineered in labs. Currently, it's like one of the most cutting edge tools in neuroscience is an engineered rabies virus. And so even the lab next to me uses it. There's no, if there's going to be a stand-like outbreak, it's going to, I think, happen with one of these engineered rabies viruses. And so in this film, all that happens is that it jumps into humans and gets out. And one of the things that happens in rabies is that you get incredibly parched. And there's this kind of like cycle between being terrified of water and then like needing water, like craving it. And the entire movie is an hour and a half of people craving water. And so what ends up happening is that people will just drown themselves constantly. And so it's almost like it's in some ways a reverse zombie movie, because exactly what happens is that tons of people flock to the oceans, tons of people flock to aquariums to drown themselves. And so you get the same like stampede, except the task of the other people in the movie is to save them as opposed to them harming you.
That is a cool concept.
And it really just gets incredibly into like what would happen with the very scarce amount of antidote that you have. And it felt like it dealt with the implications of what would happen if this really did happen. And it's eerily prescient for this idea of the Ebola, that there's one company that made a thing and they had a few they had a few doses of the cure, but how do we ramp up production? And it just deals with consequences.
That's cool. Yeah, and
salt water, any water. There's a
kidneys go.
There's like this absolutely brutal moment where they're all quarantined together, and then you see this woman just look at the fire alarm, and you can tell that she's gonna flood the entire like arena, just because she needs to drown. It's called Deranged.
Torrent that.
Yeah.
But also that's a thing that the internet does. But also go see Interstellar. I'm really, really excited about it. There's a great feature in Wired right now where they talk to physicist Kip Thorne, who came up with all the ideas. Not came up with it, but advanced a lot of the ideas about wormhole travel and things like that. That black hole that you see in the trailers that has kind of like those warping rings around it. Christopher Nolan said, I want a black hole and what it looks like an accretion disk when matter spins around, it gets hot, it gets bright. I want to see that in my movie. Kip Thorne said, well, I have equations about what it might look like, but we've never seen it before. He said, all right. So the entire rendering software was broken down and had Kip Thorne's equations put in. Some frames of this simulation took 100 hours to render. The entire simulation, the black hole that you see in the film when it's spinning around, is 800 terabytes of data of simulation. And it is so accurate that Kip Thorne is now publishing 3 papers just on this simulation that you're going to see in Interstellar. And it should be just a disk going around this black hole, right? But it looks like it's also going over it and underneath it, right? Like a cage or something. That's because we didn't know that would happen. We never knew that would happen, but the gravity of a black hole is so much that light is bending around it in such a way that you're seeing an image of the back of the disk, a back of a flat disk that you can't see. It's now in your vision, and up on the top as well. We know gravitational lensing happens when gravity acts like a lens for light, but we didn't know that it would do this around a black hole. So you're going to go, if you go see an Interstellar, you're going to go see something that we didn't know would ever happen, and that no one's really seen visualized before about our universe. And that gets me incredibly excited. All right. I'm sorry.
No. Keeping with
I've been watching movies about black holes before I got paid to watch.
Keeping with the space and planetary theme,
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier that Arthur C. Clarke was one of the first hard science fiction writers that I kind of got into, and the reason that he's fresh in my mind is that recently a paper came out that modeled the upper atmospheres of Jupiter and Saturn. Cool. And they found that there was enough carbon that would be decoupled from other molecules and would be at enough pressure and heat.
I think I know where you're going with this.
That it might actually rain diamonds from the sky. Arthur C. Clarke in 2010, the sequel to 2001, has the consciousness of David Bowman fly to the center of Jupiter, where it is the core of Jupiter is a giant diamond. So like the fact that, when he was writing this in the 70s, he hit on something that became at some point, a theoretical possibility, I always think is really cool.
Yeah.
I also think it's totally possible for Iron Man to turn that fast.
It's not though?
No. It's
This dude named Stapp threw himself on a rocket sled like 100 times. He was breaking blood vessels.
Yeah, but he wasn't a scientist.
He was pulling like...
He was just a pilot.
He was pulling like 28 Gs max. What do you think it is when you're going fighter jet speed and then you make a right turn?
Well, the F-16 Falcon can pull about 9 instantaneous Gs, so...
But when you're watching them fly, they're doing this over like the course of a mile. They're not doing that.
But I still...
So try it out, bro. Try it.
I would. If you gave me a suit,
care.
I think the suit is much bigger on the inside than it's
not a TARDIS, bro.
No, it is a TARDIS.
No, it's not.
If you stood next to Iron Man would be like 9 feet tall. Like,
No, he would.
Yes,
you
he
see
would.
him standing next to other people in a movie.
The Hulk throws everything out of perspective. And
I'm getting visually agitated.
I love this argument because I wrote another thing for Marvel about this where it's like I argued and I had engineering help with this that if he had a layer of a non-Newtonian fluid.
Yes, well, that's a way to if you're in some kind of suspended liquid environment, then it's not.
Yep, it's built-in airbags to let him.
Yeah. But he doesn't say. You don't see when he takes off. You don't see water spill out.
It's because he's drunk. He's loose.
We're all talking about this. This is all.
Yeah. But
obviously, no.
This person was asking Patrick in particular, since he knows more about diseases than the rest of us, sort of what the media's role in stoking fear versus actually explaining the danger of viruses and outbreaks and epidemics and things like that. And so how do you impress upon people how things are actually risky or dangerous without actually just making it seem like you're trying to stoke people's fear irrationally, which is obviously an almost impossible goal. And we talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, like I said, I don't think accuracy, if it's servicing the story, accuracy isn't the most important thing. Like, so with Ebola, you have contagion and outbreak. Yeah, no. I think this is important specifically because it is scaring a lot of people. Contagion and outbreak themselves make viruses seem much scarier than most of them are, or they will ever be. I think the onus is on the people in the media who then make the comparison. You can there's a spectrum of movies and TV that is accurate to totally not accurate. But when you're saying as an explanatory thing to people, saying like, oh, this is, do we have a new contagion in the U.S. from Dallas? That's irresponsible. That it's journalistic ethics at that point, and people are always going to pull what they know from pop culture to inform. Is this like contagion? But I think it's the responsibility of the media to couch those fears in something more accurate rather than the easy way out, which is just pulling a clip with Dustin Hoffman in it.
I feel like I have a bit of a heterodox opinion on this. I think as science geeks, we tend to assume we matter to that question. But the real issue is more of a political philosophy issue. I think we need strong institutions and responsible leaders because there is no such thing as journalistic ethics. It's an oxymoron. But so that's always been thus. So what will help in a situation where there are actual people dying is strong political institutions. And I mean, of course, it matters whether there's a cure for Ebola. That's a separate issue. But at the moment when it strikes, the question is not how advanced our science is. I mean, we'll get what we get at that time. It's a political philosophy matter. And I think we shouldn't put that onus on scientists to educate the public one way or the other. There will be fearmongers no matter what you do.
I also wonder if it's a problem unique to science. Like, I'm just trying to imagine that. Well, particularly in popular media or movies or film, book, etc. If there's a therapist, that therapist would say, "Well, that's not how we do our job." If they're breaking basic rules of therapy, anyone I think who sees something that they do, often even in the most unscientific romantic comedy, that's not always how people will behave. So you're not always learning.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I wonder if it's unique to science. It's just a narrative problem in some sense.
What is the most unscientific romantic?
Yeah. The Man with Two Brains?
Oh, that's a good
Go to Hell. That's my favorite movie.
I didn't say it was bad.
Good answer.
It was like Kate and Leopold. Hugh Jackman, time traveler, falls in love with Meg Ryan.
Hugh Jackman can do anything, bro.
This question gets reframed in the actual audio very quickly, but the question was sort of along the lines of like, what's really, really scary from a sort of science and sci-fi perspective? So I thought that was a pretty cool question as we head into the fall season. And this was originally recorded in October, so that was kind of what was on all our minds.
What's really scary? Neuroscience people, do you want to mention anything real quick? You're not scared of nothing?
I'm thinking.
What, really? No, you're
So,
there's things that I think are scary, but that don't necessarily translate into a science fictional thing, Alzheimer's disease or generally all the stuff that we talked about earlier with changing your personality. And
maybe
whatnot.
a better frame would be, what would be, if there was a robot horror movie or something like this, something scary about neuroscience happening. What would be an accurate thing that would make for a great terrifying, epic.
All right. So let's say that hypothetically we could upload ourselves into computers.
Yeah.
And then those computers go out of date within like 2 years because that's how the technology cycle works. So suddenly, are you responsible for just like keeping these old desktops that contain your like great grandparents like on into infinity? And you know do you just upgrade the firmware continuously, or what would happen with
I don't
that?
think we should upgrade Grandma this year. Did you see
Grandma 2.3?
Yeah, I heard 2.4 is a bit buggy. It just started spouting racist stuff. It was terrible.
Yeah, Grandma Snow Leopard. I didn't upgrade. I didn't like the fact that she could just call me anytime.
She came with free YouTube music. It was
I think this is bizarre, and kind of every person in the room might, on a personal level, disagree with me. But I think the longevity research is actually really scary, because there are people that, and it is like aging is effectively a disease. It's like people say that metaphorically, but it actually is. Like there are cellular processes in each of your cell. I mean, there are processes in each of your cells that are just aging processes.
Yeah.
And if we can fix those on like a 1-by-1 level, at some point we might just live even to 200. And even like that concept, I don't know that I can't think of anything offhand that's dealt with that.
Do you really want to live? Yeah.
Well, so nobody, like immortality is like that to me seems something that's the scale of implausibility. Like that's going to be implausible. But then 200 years is like not that unheard of. So 100 years ago, the 3 leading causes of death for humans were all like pathogen. It was like influenza and smallpox and, things that we've since cured. And now it's things that are kind of the body breaking down on its own. But then
Heart disease, cancer,
cardiovascular
disease.
I think there's something terrifying to like, maybe there's a disease that we get when we're 150 that we just don't know we get.
And it's really, really bad.
It's like you like metamorph
Zombies.
into
Sure.
just like some other thing, like some genetically programmed thing kicks in at 150. And so there's this whole unknown, like every year we extend our lifespans. To me, there's this unknown of like a new disease could happen.
Yeah.
And,
Do you know what really scares me is that we have so much, and not to say that we shouldn't have faith in our institutions and things like that, and our scientists and our foundations and stuff like that. I think we are constantly on the precipice of just complete failure of some fundamental thing. Like the power grid is so finely tuned, it would not take much to lose all of it. And knowing what we... Did it happen? Oh, it started! It wouldn't take much to throw, I think, most of the world into chaos, and I think we give ourselves way too much the benefit of the doubt, knowing what we do about human psychology and the way that we handle ourselves politically and in groups, that it's just... I think that we let ourselves sleep soundly when it's kind of almost bad all the time. How about one more question, then we'll be done. I know it's getting late. If anyone has one, otherwise. All right, thank you guys so much for sticking around afterwards. We'll be here. Some of us will be here chatting and stuff. But please enjoy the rest of your Bay Area Science Festival. It sounds dope. Do you guys have anything that you want to mention and/or plug before we go? Like we're being broadcast or some shit? Doing stuff later?
Yeah, I have an event tomorrow at 7 p.m. at the Castro, but it's sold out, but I think we're doing walk-up tickets. We probably have a couple left if anybody wants to come. Matt Inman from the Oatmeal's keynote lecture there. So, should be pretty neat.
Could you tell people a little bit about what it is?
It's called the Festival of Bad Ad Hoc Hypotheses, and it's basically like a fake bad a biology seminar. So people give sort of just so stories of evolution. So the one I gave the keynote lecture. The first one was that babies are adapted to be aerodynamic. Because primitive humans would have catapulted their babies to get into more genetically distinct populations. And so there's actually a lot of lines of evidence, like that's why they're hairless, right? Because less air drag. But here's the thing. is they have a little head hair, which, is there anyone in avionics? You know how the dimples on a golf ball limit the wake?
You're making the boundary layer for the turbulent flow closer to
Right, so you get less of a turbulent wake due to the little vellus hair on the baby's head as it's flying through the air. And so this is actually a 7-minute long talk.
I want to see someone put like a baby into a wind tunnel just like in front of smoke.
I tried. I really did. I had a professor I had the
professor who was a baby.
Professor Baby. Tried a lot.
Gotta start early with tenure these days.
I don't want the story to get too long, but the short version is the head of the physics club at a certain university, I won't say, told me I could get access to the avionics department's wind tunnel to put a baby doll in there.
Just don't tell anybody.
Yeah.
Hey, Tim, edit out doll.
Yeah, right. But then he like basically told me I had it, and then he explained it to the professor, and the professor was like, "No, we're not doing that." So no one knows actually how aerodynamic a baby is. So
such a weird sentence.
So
has anyone said that sentence?
Anyway, there are 6. So it's like a competition, though. It's who gives the best, definitely fake theory of evolution. And it's tomorrow at 7 o'clock at the Castro.
Awesome.
It's called the Festival of Bad Ad Hoc Hypotheses, but we call it BAHFest, BAHFEST.com. All the info is there. Yeah.
Any stuff, guys? Stuff to mention you're doing?
I'll be at BAHFest tomorrow. I just did my thing. I'm done.
Oh. All right.
Mission accomplished.
I write all the science stuff on Nerdist.com, and I have a weekly show called Because Science on the Nerdist YouTube channel. You guys can subscribe there, and I do
really
stuff.
Good.
Thank you. And you can always find me in the Twitterverse at SCI_PHILE sci-fi. So thank you guys so much for coming, and enjoy the rest of your night, and walk safe, bike safe. Yay.
She's just been doing some manipulative experiments on
I'm in LA.
which is pretty cool because there aren't a lot of manipulative.
Flew up. I'm gonna try to get some coverage for some stuff, like tomorrow, like the testing show, and then podcast. Talk to the owner a little bit. I'll be around. But my brother just moved here after college, and I haven't seen him in like 9 months, so I'm gonna have dinner with my brother. Hey, thank you so much.
Yeah,
that was a lot of fun. I'll hit you up on the tweet sometime.
Sure, yeah. You're welcome to come to the show if you want.
I think.
Yeah, surely not making money.
That was good. It was heated. I believe I'm right about neutrinos.
I'm not arguing about neutrinos. I'm arguing about.
No, I know. Yeah, I'm just feeling.
I knew you knew what I was talking about. It was winning the crowd, and you were playing the crowd like a fiddle against me. It's all right.
Hey, Kelly.
It was fun. It was really nice to meet you.
Let me trade with you real quick.
These are people who are performing at Buffett.
Another one. Mine right now.
You might. right, thanks for listening to what ended up being a little bit less traditional episode. We will be back on schedule as we get some great things recorded for you in the upcoming weeks, so stay tuned for all that. Just to go ahead and plug Kyle's stuff for him one more time, since he was nice enough to have me on his panel. He is sci-file on Twitter with an underscore. We'll link to that in the show notes, and he does the Because Science video series for the Nerdist, and those are pretty great. He does a lot of great Star Wars and comic books and the sort of nerdy things I'm into, and his content is pretty top notch. So I do recommend going and checking that out if you haven't already. And I'll also link to Patrick and Zach's stuff in the show notes too, because can't leave them out. But now it is time for the PaleoPOW, which is the listener feedback segment of the show. And I've got a pretty fun one today. I've got an old school PayPal one-time donation from Thomas K. Thomas wrote a little note with the donation and sent me a short email as well. So I'm going to go through both of those real quick. For the donation, he says, I support SSO every time I purchase from Amazon. I hope the affiliate link thing is still a thing. I have not heard you promote it recently. Then he says, just between you and me, but I'm going to make it between all of us. I first started listening 3 years ago, and although I found your pedantic nature annoying, I found you to be a talented interviewer who was able to attract fun and interesting guests. I stuck with it. I either got used to you or you got less annoying. I think it is the latter. Keep it coming. SSO is my favorite science podcast, and you have some really slick, well-produced competition. Well, Thomas, thank you for that. I also hope that I've gotten less annoying. I definitely think I'm less of a pedant than I used to be. I think I've mellowed on needing to be right or needing to correct people as often as I probably did in earlier episodes of the show, but that's not something I'm really interested in going back and doing the statistics on. I think I would just end up upset and annoyed with myself. So we're going to avoid doing that, but I'm glad you stuck with it, and I'm glad you decided to contribute a little money. We really appreciate that. Just to clarify your point on the Amazon affiliate link, that is still a thing. So whenever we link to something in the show note that takes you to Amazon, that link is custom created by me when I'm writing the show notes to provide a little cookie in your browser that lets Amazon know that when you buy something through that link, doesn't matter if you buy that exact product or if you buy anything else during that browsing session on Amazon, we get a little cut from that. It has ended up being a really fruitful way for us to actually get a little money to keep the show going, so I definitely do encourage people to use our Amazon link when possible. If you want, you can just go to scienceorb.com, and if you scroll down, you'll see that there's some options for supporting the show, including just downloading us on iTunes or whatever podcatcher you prefer, donating through PayPal, which Thomas did, becoming a patron on Patreon, or go to Amazon. So if you just click that Amazon link, that's that same custom link that will get us a few cents out of Jeff Bezos' pocket and into our pockets, and it doesn't cost you anything extra, so we really appreciate all the people who do that for us. Thank you so much, Thomas, for your continued use of that program, even if you weren't sure if it was working. I believe I also set up a permanent redirect. If you just go to scienceorb.com/Amazon, it'll take you to our Amazon affiliate page, so check that out too. As to Thomas's other email, he wanted to give us some feedback on the fossil hunting episode where Bev, Abe, and I went fossil hunting in Maryland looking for some shark teeth on the beach. And because that was kind of a different sort of episode where we actually went out and recorded some stuff in the field and, created what I've been calling kind of an audio field guide for that fossil site, I really was curious to get some feedback on that episode. And you guys have been great about sending stuff in. I'm just reading Thomas's because it was one of the first ones I saw, and he made a donation. So Thomas says, Ryan, you asked us to let you know what we thought about this episode. I enjoyed it very much and would like to hear additional episodes like this. We just got back from 14 days in Virginia, and I'm kicking myself that the idea of fossil hunting was not on our radar. We enjoyed Virginia and found people very friendly. We found lots of great things to do and did something special nearly every day we were there. Yes, more adventure episodes. Do more recordings in the field when practical, even if they are in a bar or restaurant after a day of adventuring. People think science is boring. You guys make it fascinating and fun. Well, Thomas, thanks for that feedback. I've taken some classes and gotten to know some actual radio people in the course of doing this show. And one of the things that radio people tell you that I still have not been able to fully implement in my own life is you just have to get really shameless about pulling out the microphone and recording. And they say just get used to being the dork who's wearing the giant headphones and holding a thing in people's faces all the time. And I haven't gotten over that yet. I still get really embarrassed and awkward when I'm recording in person or when I'm at a conference and I'm like, would you like to come on my podcast? It's just not as boisterous as I come across on the podcast. Sometimes I get a little shy in person and it's hard to ask people to come on your show. I don't know. I almost always say yes and are very friendly, and it's easy once we're actually recording, but it's that initial awkwardness hurdle. So feedback like this, just telling me that folks enjoy it and that we should keep doing it, will help me hopefully get over myself and just take my microphone more places and actually use it when I do take it places, because I end up traveling with it a lot of times and then never actually using it. And so I need to stop doing that, and I will try. Well, hopefully you enjoyed this episode. This should be the last of the From the Archives for a little while as we start cranking out some new stuff. You can check out the show notes for this episode at sciencesortof.com, where you can find everything else that you need to just become a part of our awesome community. I have been loving the feedback we've been getting lately. After a few rough days in a row, or even a whole week of rough days, it is super encouraging to wake up in the morning and check the show's email account to find something nice in there, and just kind of puts a smile on my face as I start the day. So thank you everyone who takes the time to do that, and thank you everyone who takes the time to listen and download the show. So we couldn't do this without you. We never forget that. We hope you don't either. And we look forward to next time, where we'll be sure to bring you a whole lot more science. And I always try to do something a little interesting for the sort of when I'm on my own and I'm looking around and I got nothing. I got no inspiration. The dog doesn't speak when I ask him to, so I can't get a little yip.
Visit sciencesortof.com for show notes, links to all the stories we talked about, and ways to interact with the hosts, guests, and other listeners. Science Sort of is brought to you by the Brachiolobe Media Network of podcasts, with audio engineering by Tim Dobbs of the Encyclopedia Brunch podcast. That's all for this week. See you next time on Science Sort of.
Staring at an uncooperative dog. Probably wants me to end the show so we can go play fetch. Which I guess I should do. Okay, bye.